Welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we report the truth about American exceptionalism. We love our flag, we love our country, and we believe in America. The Definitive Wrap, where we respect people of faith, the men and women in blue, and our support for Israel. And now your hosts, Bela Sebro, she's the nice one, and Alan Skorsky. He's not so nice. But together they are The Definitive Wrap.
I'm Alan Skorsky with my co-host Bela Sebro, and welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we discuss the news items the mainstream media just won't touch. The Definitive Wrap is proud to be the official podcast of vinnews.com. Today we have a very special guest from the UK, whom Bela will give a proper introduction shortly. Ghanem Nuseibeh, whose family has strong ties to Jerusalem, is an entrepreneur, a business consultant, and an expert analyst on the politics of the Middle East, who has appeared on many news networks and is the founder of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. On his website, muslimsagainstantisemitism.org, you will find columns such as, "This Holocaust Memorial Day, we need to stand together against anti-Semitism," or "With a new year comes renewed commitments, including fighting Holocaust denial." I cannot think of a more propitious time than today to have someone as knowledgeable as Mr. Nuseibeh, with the signing of the Abraham Accords and Saudi Arabia kind of warming relations with Israel, while at the same time Iran is ratcheting up their threats against Israel and their neighbors, clearly testing out a new U.S. administration. As someone who lives in the UK, he is also an expert on the rise of Islamist-inspired anti-Semitism, something we saw in the last British elections with Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party, and the number of members of parliament who were forced to resign because of anti-Semitic statements and tweets. Ghanem has been at the forefront to combat this mainstreamed type of racism. In 2019, he spoke at a rally in Parliament Square against anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and co-signed a letter published in The Guardian, encouraging voters not to vote for Labour on grounds of anti-Semitism. Bela?
Thank you, Alan. The highest level one can reach amongst their friends is not to side with his friends against their enemy, but to convince his friends to become friends with the enemy so that they can all become friends together. And our honored guest today, Ghanem Nuseibeh, lives to fight Jew hate and Muslim hate together for a better world, a world of peace. In fact, he was quoted saying, "We Muslims have one word for Jews, shalom." Ghanem believes that the time has come to speak out, and to speak out he has. Ghanem has been able to challenge anti-Semitism in Muslim communities quite successfully, and that is a major achievement and accomplishment. So who is this very special and amazing man? Ghanem Nuseibeh became chairman of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism in May 2018. He was born in 1977, and he comes from an old Jerusalem Muslim family who are custodians of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Ghanem has been a campaigner for interfaith and anti-extremism work for over 2 decades, where at university he led the UK's first Muslim-Jewish interfaith group and contributed to the 1997 report on extremism on campus in British universities by the Committee of Vice Chancellors and Principals of UK universities. He is patron of the British Friends of Neve Shalom, Wahat al-Salam since 2001, and of Faith Matters since 2017. Welcome, welcome to The Definitive Wrap.
It's very kind of you, Bela, and Alan, very much appreciate your very, very kind and warm word. Love to be here.
Oh, that's certainly our pleasure. You cannot imagine what an honor it is to be in your presence.
It's on the mind.
I'm very curious, though. You grew up Muslim, and for sure, not every Muslim hates Jews, but you took it to a distinct degree that most Muslims would not do, even if they do not hate Jews, and even if they may have friends who are Jewish. You founded Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. So my question is, What inspired you to start Muslims Against Anti-Semitism?
Well, that's very kind. Just to set the record straight, my very good colleague Fayez Mughal is the founder. I'm the chairman of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, but we work together, obviously, in establishing it. But he really should take the credit rather than me. And
You're a very humble man, that's for sure. I just noted that now too. Okay. In addition to all your other wonderful qualities and characteristics.
That's very kind. Well, Muslim and Against Anti-Semitism is, and let's talk about anti-Semitism in the Muslim community has been a problem that the Muslim world has been really trying to contend with for most of the 20th century. Obviously, historically, Muslims and Jews had closer relations, perhaps, than other communities. Obviously, nothing's been always perfect. I mean, people of different religions have differences, and that has to be acknowledged. But at least the closeness between Muslims and Jews is historical in the Middle East and in other places, even in medieval Spain and so on. 20th century was an odd century in that respect, where obviously politics and wars and everything intervened and sort of spoiled the relationship. Much of the anti-Semitism that has took place in the Arab world, obviously a lot of it is homegrown and that cannot be denied. But a lot of it is also imported, particularly from Europe and for example, Nazi literature, all sorts of awful things that have managed to find their way into Muslim schools and countries and so on. And so you had that homegrown hatred against Jews in Muslim countries that was supplemented or genetically modified by European anti-Semitism. Yeah. So you had a fatal mix of hatred towards Jews in all Muslim countries, even people who never met a Jew. I mean, you go to places like Pakistan, which doesn't have, their tradition has been a small number of Pakistani Jews, but 99% of Pakistanis haven't met Jews, but they hate them. Why do they? I mean, you don't even know who these people are.
Right, that's how they were taught. That's how they were raised. Yeah, as you said, homegrown. Yeah, absolutely.
And that sort of it's almost like a cancer that just spread.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of initiatives here and there trying to create common grounds between Jews and Muslims, and trying to explain to Muslims that Jews, anti-Semitism is wrong as it was, and that we have much closeness with our Jewish friends and brethren and compatriots and neighbors and so on. But a lot of the things that have been taking place have really either been behind closed doors or between the educated and so on. What we started with Fiyaz is really brilliant as it is to try to reach out to the average man and woman and child and kid and everyone in the Muslim communities. Want to teach them that there is these things are wrong, and those and anti-Semitism has to be challenged within the Muslim communities, and those and alliances with anti-Semites, whether they support Muslim causes or not, is wrong, and that's how we started, and that's how we're moving.
Great.
So I want to ask you, how were you confronted in England? For example, I don't remember his first name. I think it's Adnan Chowdhury. I used to see him on the news a lot, and he's very, very anti-European, very anti-Semitic. Do you find different segments of the Muslim community, and also to just clarify, most Americans are very ignorant. To them, a Muslim is somebody who wears a turban, who could be a Sikh or a Hindu. And we know there are Shiites, we know there are Sunni, we know there are Wahhabi, we know there are Uyghurs now because of China. So is this something that is prevalent amongst all the different segments of Islam? Is it certain ones that are more than others? Is there any group that you're targeting yourself that you work better within?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. First of all, Muslims, they're over 1.5 billion Muslims. So you're talking about quarter or a fifth of the world's population, and there would be a lot of variance and variation between the various communities. The Sunni and Shia, obviously, are the two main sects, and then you've got subgroups for them, subgroups that are either ideological but also political ones. And anti-Semitism exists in all of them. I cannot say there is a sect that is sort of that has shunned anti-Semitism. Obviously, the different degrees of anti-Semitism, and that, unfortunately, is very much exploited by the political leaders of those sects who controls them. So, for example, you've got Iran now in charge of a large segment of the Shia population. I cannot say all, obviously, because there are Shia who are very moderate and very much against the Iranian Islamic regime. But the reality is, when you have politicians mixing religion, you get anti-Semitism inspired by politics, as we see in Iran, for example, as definitely we've seen with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Muslim Brotherhood, who, groups like Muslim Brotherhood, for example, aren't at the front line of being seen as enemies by the security services, because obviously they don't necessarily always carry bombs and ready to detonate, but their insidious way of spreading anti-Semitism is what ultimately leads to anti-Semitism on the front line, that sort of then leads to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So there is a very degree, a very wide spectrum of anti-Semitism that is a reflection of the degree of Islamism within the large Muslim community, both in the UK and around the world.
Right. Ghanem, you were quoted in the Times of Israel saying that you know that you are successful because your organization has become targets of extremists who aim to undermine your work. Furthermore, you stated that Islamist extremists, anti-Semites, and their foreign governmental supporters have made you their common enemy. Can you give us an example of any attempts to undermine your work or target you in any way?
Yes, with pleasure. I mean, obviously, I'll be careful because there's some legal cases that are going on.
Yeah, I understand that. Sure.
There is a most recent case is one where I've actually made a complaint to the UN Secretary General for being targeted by extrajudicial surveillance, that we found basically surveillance equipment outside my office in London. The police were called, the UK police, and now we're sort of investigating, and that was likely because of my complaints about anti-Semitism to the United Nations Office of the Human Rights Commissioner last year. That was in May. The Secretary General every year of the United Nations calls for people who have been targeted because of work they've done, for example, with the United Nations, and that is a clear example that our work against anti-Semitism that's been given to the United Nations, submitted to the United Nations, led to people, whoever is behind them, and that's what hopefully we'll be able to find with ongoing police investigations and legal cases. People putting surveillance equipment. I know my emails have been hacked because a lot of it has been illegally accessed and published in obscure media around the world. They tend to find places where there is really no legal structures to stop that publication. So that is ongoing surveillance, whether it's electronic or whether it's physical through the placing of surveillance equipment is ongoing, and that is definitely a threat that we all have to deal with. Yeah. Other colleagues of mine have on many occasions had to call the police because of threats, whether direct or indirect threats online through social media, emails. So we've got the whole spectrum of threats coming from who knows who is behind them. I mean, there are obviously extremists.
Could be anything, but in terms of, I mean, I understand the targeting, but in terms of undermining your work, have you experienced any of that as well?
Oh yes, I mean, trying to publish fake news and on one occasion we've had an article published in a website in North Macedonia where they've literally just produced a document that was forged and built a story around it, and where are you going to I'm sure the North Macedonian courts are all wonderful and capable, but it's, they just do it in places where it's sort of outside of your reach realistic reach. You're not going to spend your time fighting people who are fighting you. That's because that's a distraction.
Distraction from the work you're trying to accomplish so successfully.
Absolutely, and what unfortunately happens is when these things are published in places like North Macedonia, you've got social media on Twitter and Facebook who would be very happily translate them, and then they just post articles. They get translated into Arabic, and websites that no one's heard of becomes sort of the most reliable piece of background information. So yes, that has happened.
Yeah.
But we've been very successful. Partially successful in sort of dealing with any mainstream attacks in civilized places of the world. But there are places that unfortunately are, you just leave them.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, I know in the last elections, and we have this problem in America, and it sickens me as a Jew, there are Jewish leftists in the UK who are supporters of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and they defend him. And I'm wondering, did they ever call you, because I can understand why other Muslims would call you a traitor to the faith, but have you ever gotten calls from Jewish leftists in the UK telling you to back off and that you're wrong, Jeremy Corbyn is not anti-Semitic? Is there any particular group that has tried to undermine you, or is it just equally across the board amongst leftist progressives?
Well, it's been across the board. I mean, luckily the support Jeremy Corbyn has within the Jewish community is minimal, and it's there are obviously there are always outliers, and they exist. But yes, I've been called Islamophobic by Jewish supporters of Corbyn. But that's how do you respond to that? So I mean,
yeah.
But yes, that's a problem. I think the Jewish community in the UK overall, even left-wing Jews, not just right-wing Jews, who are very suspicious of the UK Labour Party because of the history of Jeremy Corbyn, who is still there, and I think it will be a very long time before relations can really be mended. I think a lot of damage has been done. You will still have a small number of people who would still subscribe to those politics, but they're not a worry. I think you look at the opinion polls now. Labour in the UK is as bad as it's ever been, even with a change of leadership.
Right.
And the damage is long term, and the people still don't believe there is a proper break from the past.
Right. And you have spoken in favor of the Abraham Accords, and that is rare and maybe not even safe for a Muslim to speak positively about the historic peace and normalization deals that were signed between Israel and 4 Arab countries. So please tell us your views about the Abraham Accords from a businessman's perspective and the potential impact on those countries.
Well, I think the only thing that I can say is that the Abraham Accords came maybe a little bit late, but never, never late than never is I guess is a better thing. I think there's a great deal of opportunities, particularly with the UAE-Israeli relations, the Emirati and the UAE relations. We've got two really powerhouses of the Middle East, of talent, of potential, and of forward-looking. Not just leaderships, because we're talking about real people here,
right.
Across society, across the political spectrum, across the economic strata of both countries, who are keen on establishing relationships. So you're seeing very big companies. We've recently seen, for example, G42 from the UAE and Rafael in Israel signing a deal on artificial intelligence, but you've got the much smaller grassroots ones that we don't hear about, whether it's vegetable exporters or fish exporters or perfumes and cosmetics and dates, right. and sorts of, the small things that do not make it to the news but are happening, and that's why we're seeing trade now growing into well in excess of $1 billion a year, and I think it'll grow even more and more. That to the extent that I think UAE-Israeli trade relations will be so important for both nations. Just so much potential there. again with Bahrain as well, and hopefully with other countries as the as more countries join the new Middle East.
Yep, I watched you in an interview. I think it was on the BBC. And they were talking about the modernization of Saudi Arabia. Now they're allowing cinemas and movies. And I'm just wondering, I mean, they're a large country. Is it the family? Is it the monarchy that's strict? Is it the people? And again, I just compare it to the Jewish community. You know, in Israel, you have those on the ultra-Orthodox right who will never have a TV or radio in the house. And you have others who go to the beaches in their bikinis. As far as Saudi Arabia goes, where does it come from? Is it coming down from the family itself? Is it the people? Are there different segments that want to be more modernized? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Of course. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a big country, both geographically and culturally. It covers an area that it stretches from the Red Sea, the borders of Yemen, to the borders of Sinai, of Israel, and then on the east you've got obviously the Gulf that's so close to Iran. So you've got a spectrum of Muslims in Saudi Arabia with different cultural and religious adherence, perhaps that's the word on this. I mean, the country is obviously important in Islam, being the custodians of the two holy mosques and so on. So that's been important. Generally, Saudis are probably again, which part of Saudi you're looking at. So depending the trading regions of Saudi who are used to trading with the rest of the world. There are people in Saudi in Mecca, for example, who are used to, although it's a religious place, but they're used to seeing people from all over the world coming every year. So there's a bit more openness there. But then there are the ones who are very traditional, regardless. That's how they are, in traditional, religious, almost sort of the Hasidic equivalent of Islam. So that's. Yeah. I was watching Shtisel on Netflix. And,
I knew you were going to say Shtisel.
It is very much part of Saudi Arabia. With Jewish dress, right? Without the whiskey, obviously, but right. that's how it is. And there is and that's why there's sort of there's it's a spectrum. Now the history, obviously, of bin Laden coming from Saudi Arabia has been a problem, and that's not a problem that I would say is purely a Saudi problem. It's been a Western problem because the West has encouraged the Saudis to create and support those people who were fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. And when we can analyze this forever, but whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but that's how it is. And so it's when the country's leadership, Mohammed bin Salman, trying to liberalize things, I think he knows that he would probably like to just switch a button and turn everyone into a liberal westernized society. But again, he's got to sort of bear in mind there are other elements in society that he needs to sort of give them the option of, you can live the sort of the Muslim equivalent of Hasidism in your own places, but let the others sort of also do things the way that they would like to do, like the rest of the world, like almost everywhere.
Yeah. Speaking of Shtisel and reference to Israel, do you have a relationship with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
I don't. No. Unfortunately, I don't.
Yeah.
I want to also ask you, because going back to the Middle East, you're young. You're in your mid-40s, and you have a global. And I was fascinated about people like you who, at a young age, have established global businesses. Can you tell us, how did you get to be you, and have the influence that you have? Again, it's not like I found you by Googling, anti-Semitic Muslim. You have a real presence in the Middle East. How did you become who you are?
Well, that's very humbling. I think that's sort of being from the Middle East, that whether you're Jewish or Arab, you just explore things and you want to explore the world. And I think one of the things that I was keen on always doing is connecting dots and connecting peoples, and that obviously went into connecting businesses. I studied civil engineering at university, but I've got a sort of a lot of involvement in real estate, both in the UK, in the UAE, and in other places. But I expanded into other businesses, and that ability to connect, and that's why I think the opportunities that businesses and people now with the Abraham Accords have in the UAE and in Israel to connect, I think will open so many doors. I think I was in a unique position that, being from Jerusalem, so I've got a foot in Israel, but I've also got a foot in the UAE, and I've got a foot in the UK. Something that sort of others, not many people have. But now with the Abraham Accords, everyone have. So I've lost sort of, in that respect, my unique selling point. But I need to find a new one now. But I'm glad I did, in many respects. And I think that yes, the ability to connect, the ability to explore things that others, haven't realized, and the world is full of opportunities. Whatever, if you put your head to something, you'll achieve it. I think that's really a very Israeli way of looking at things, perhaps, rather than putting yourself in a box and just following the crowd.
And you do so very successfully. Ghanem, how many members do you have in the organization you're chairing, Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, and do you recruit members?
We're obviously a registered charity in the UK, and as a registered charity, we need to have a number of trustees. Our trustees are obviously myself, Fayaz Mughal, Elizabeth Arifir, Wasik, and Haris Rafiq. So we've got 5 of us as trustees. Then we've got people who do the day-to-day work and administrative work, and we've got volunteers as well who support us across the UK, and we're always calling for volunteers and people who would like to work for us, particularly in Muslim communities, reaching out to schools, to communities, to universities.
So you recruit members?
Yes, absolutely.
You
do. Yeah.
So which begs the question, how do you check and make sure that the people who are involved are sincere and not just people trying to snoop around? What is it that you look for in a potential member or employee or volunteer of the organization?
Well, it's obviously someone who needs to, who believes in the fight of anti-Semitism, fighting anti-Semitism within the Muslim communities, who is prepared, whether she or he are prepared to speak to that community wherever they come from, whether it's a community in England or a school or university, whether they do it physically or unfortunately now mostly online and Zoom and social media. It's easy obviously to go with social media. It's easy to check the background of people.
So you do a full background check.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, there has been organizations in the UK who have been caught out. They've recruited senior people, and the media's checked their backgrounds, and they've found all sorts of anti-Semitic stuff, and that's been embarrassing. I mean, it's not with what happened with Islamic Relief, for example, which is a UK registered charity, and a lot of trustees, I think all the trustees, if I'm not mistaken, had to resign after Facebook posts were found to be anti-Semitic.
I want to ask you, in America, throughout the world, they always blame crime, violence, terrorism on poverty. The Trump administration had proposed the deal of the century, which would have gotten all of the, or at least many of the oil kingdoms to put in billions of dollars into Ramallah and the territories under the Palestinian Authority, and it was rejected. Now Joe Biden comes in and he wants to undo everything that Trump had proposed. Yesterday, day before, there was a convention here by a group called J Street. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're basically a progressive organization, and they want to undo everything that Trump had proposed. Moving forward, do you see the countries involved in the UAE and the Gulf states trying to go back to this idea of saying, we're going to pump the money in and we can improve people's lives. Is there any backlash against Abbas for having rejected it, or people standing with him saying, good for you for poking your finger in Trump's eyes?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one, because obviously people need to, they want to prosper, they want to have opportunities, and they want borders to open, and they mostly reject terrorism. You've got obviously enough people to give a headache, but and unfortunately people's lives and livelihoods have been politicized to such a degree that they're being terrorized to follow a certain political line. And as I've said, you know, the two-state solution has very much been a European project now, the way it is being presented. And I'm not saying that, you know, two-state or one-state, I'm not advocating any political solution, but the way that it is being presented now is not a solution to the Palestinian problem or even to the Israeli problem. It's a European solution for a European problem, but they're just superimposing it on the Palestinian people. And as long as the Palestinian Authority and leadership continue to rely on a European solution for that European problem, there's not going to be a solution to the opening the doors of prosperity that the Palestinians want. And I think the Abraham Accords are the perfect opportunity to open up the doors of prosperity to the Palestinians, and you know, put politics aside. That, you know, we've been doing this for 70 or 80 years, it hasn't worked, and just try another way of existing. Yeah. And I think we're at a crossroads here. Unfortunately, I don't see the current U.S. administration, assisted by the European Union, are prepared to look at afresh at the problem, at this issue. They'd rather live in their comfort zone and send aid money and assume that the Palestinians are content with the aid money, but they're not. You know, they no nation and no person would be happy to live forever on receiving aid money. I mean, aid money is supposed to be a temporary relief for a problem that might last a year or two, but you know, it's not something that can last forever. And the longer it lasts, the greater the harm it puts on the Palestinians. Yes.
Ghanem, we are out of time. Thank you for agreeing to be our guest today. We wish you continued success on your work. May God bless you and protect you for a long, healthy, happy life.
Thank you, and you too. It's a great honor to be with you today. I'm really, really grateful.
We'll be in touch with you.
Thank you to our listening audience for tuning in to The Definitive Wrap. And we appreciate vinnews.com for our show being their official podcast. Thank you so much again.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Definitive Wrap with your hosts, Bela Sebro and Alan Skorsky. Be sure to tell your family and friends they also can listen to The Definitive Wrap on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, and your favorite streaming service. See you next time on The Definitive Wrap.